Imagine waking up one morning in June and it's snowing. Not a light frost, not an unseasonal chill, snow. In June. In New England, in France, in Germany. Crops wilted and died in the fields, horses starved, families went hungry, and nobody knew why. This is the story of 1816, the year that had no summer, and it begins not in Europe or America, but on a volcanic island in the Indonesian archipelago, with the most destructive eruption in recorded human history. April 10, 1815, Mount Tambora on the island of Sumbawa explodes. To put this in perspective, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, the one that leveled an entire mountainside and made global headlines, released energy equivalent to roughly 24 megatons of TNT. Tambora released the equivalent of 800 megatons. It was over 30 times more powerful. The sound of the explosion was heard over 2,000 kilometers away, as far as Sri Lanka to the west and Australia to the south. Witnesses as far as Borneo thought they were hearing cannon fire and prepared for a naval attack. The eruption column reached 43 kilometers into the sky. Tambora ejected an estimated 160 cubic kilometers of volcanic material. The mountain itself lost 1,400 meters of its peak. An entire civilization, the Tamboran people, their language, their culture, was wiped from the earth almost entirely. Around 71,000 people died in the immediate disaster, but the true death toll was only just beginning. When a volcano of this magnitude erupts, it doesn't just throw rock and ash into the air. It injects enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide gas into the stratosphere, far higher than weather systems can wash it back down. Once up there, that sulfur dioxide reacts with water vapor to form a fine aerosol, a reflective veil that wraps around the entire planet. Sunlight that would normally reach the surface is scattered back into space. The Earth begins to cool. By the time 1816 arrived, Tambora's aerosol veil had spread across the globe. Average temperatures dropped by 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius worldwide. That might not sound like much, but in a world entirely dependent on agriculture, a fraction of a degree is the difference between a harvest and a famine. In New England, snow fell in June. Farmers who'd already planted their crops watched them freeze. July and August brought brief warmth, then frost again in September, killing whatever had managed to survive. The year became known locally as 1800 and froze to death. In Europe, the misery was arguably worse. The continent was already exhausted from over 20 years of Napoleonic wars. Food prices had been rising, and now the harvests failed across France, Switzerland, Germany, the British Isles. Grain prices soared by as much as 400% in some regions. Famine spread across Europe. In Ireland, a potato and oat failure triggered widespread starvation and an outbreak of typhus. In Switzerland, the government declared a national emergency. In Germany, the Rhine flooded late, the result of abnormal weather patterns, destroying what little harvest remained. Hundreds of thousands of people, particularly in Central Europe, simply packed what they had and left, migrating west to America, to anywhere that might offer the chance of a meal. Some historians trace the roots of major 19th century emigration waves directly back to this single volcanic eruption. And in China and India, disrupted monsoon patterns triggered flooding, crop failure, and the likely emergence of a new strain of cholera, one that would go on to cause the first global cholera pandemic. All of it, traceable back to one mountain, one night, April 10, 1815. But the year without a summer left behind more than suffering. In June of 1816, a group of friends gathered at the Villa Diodati on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. The weather was so relentlessly cold and stormy that they couldn't go outside. So they stayed in, read ghost stories by the fire, and challenged each other to write one of their own. One of those friends was an 18-year-old named Mary Godwin, soon to be Mary Shelley. The story she began that summer was Frankenstein, a tale of creation gone wrong, of a scientist who reaches beyond what nature intended and pays the price. Some literary scholars argue the entire dark Gothic atmosphere of the novel, the brooding weather, the moral unease, the sense of a world out of balance, is soaked in the climate of that extraordinary, terrible year. The same summer also inspired John William Polidori to write The Vampire, the story that gave birth to the modern vampire genre. Two of the most enduring monster stories in Western literature, born in the same house during the same volcanic winter. Mount Tambora reminds us how fragile civilization really is, how one geological event, one moment of the Earth exhaling, can ripple outward across an entire planet, killing harvests, toppling governments, displacing hundreds of thousands of people, and reshaping culture in ways we're still living with today. The year 1816 had no summer, but it left a very long shadow. If you found this video interesting, there's plenty more where that came from. Subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.